Thank you for joining in, everyone. A very good afternoon to everyone joining from India. Good morning or afternoon to everyone joining from Israel. Thank you for joining us today for a special program, the Masterclass series on emerging technologies, organized under the aegis of India-Israel Forum and jointly convened by the Ananta Aspen Center, Confederation of Indian Industry, and Tel Aviv University. This series is an initiative to promote academic linkages between India and Israel by enhancing technical knowledge and awareness about emerging technologies among college students in India. These masterclasses are possible thanks to the generous support of Triveni Turbine Limited. Thank you all for joining us. This is a very special session we have, and our speaker today is joining us all the way from Israel. We are delighted to have you, Professor Feldman. She's a professor at the Blavatnik School of Computer Science at Tel Aviv University. She is a visiting scholar at Microsoft Research. Her research spans computer science, economics, game theory, and operations research. She has received multiple Best Paper Awards and the TAU's Rector Award for Excellence in Teaching. She is the recipient of coveted international grants and fellowships, including 2 ERC grants of the European Research Council, Marie Curie IOF, Elon, ISF, and Amazon Research Award. She was listed in Forbes' list of 50 most influential women in Israel in 2016 and in the Markers list of 40 under 40 in 2014. A very warm welcome to you, Professor. We are very happy to have you with us today and eager to hear you talk. We will begin with a 45-minute talk by the professor, and then we will move on to the question-answer session. She will, of course, be incorporating any questions that come up during the conversation. A couple of housekeeping rules before we begin for everyone participating. Please send in your questions throughout the session during the professor's talk as well. For that, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please don't wait till the end of her talk to send in those questions. We will be taking them up throughout. With that, I'm now going to hand the floor to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And let me share my slides with you. Do you see my slides clear?
Yes, Professor.
Great, thank you very much. And again, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me to give the talk today. And I'm going to talk about complexity and simplicity in market design, which hopefully will give you the flavor of the research we are doing in my lab at Tel Aviv University. So let me give you some background first. So what is this field of algorithmic game theory? The internet has become a huge platform for very unique and new types of markets that enable the flow of value from different parts of the market to other parts. So just to give you some examples, we are talking about markets for lodging and rides, and cloud computing, and social networks, and online commerce, and congestion pricing, and spectrum auction, and so on and so forth. So many new types of markets. And what's special about these markets is that in order to reason about it and to design them well, we must take into account many types of considerations and constraints. We want those markets to be economically efficient. We also want to consider all the strategic issues. So those are markets among multiple individuals, firms, and companies that have their own self-interest. So we need to understand the strategic issues that are going on in those markets. And of course, those markets are running on a computational platform. So it's very crucial that we also take into account all the computational issues. We need these systems to run smoothly and fast. So we need very efficient algorithms in order to run these markets. So this area of algorithmic game theory, or AGT, it lies in the intersection of multiple disciplines, economics, game theory, and computer science. and it offers a unified framework for the design of algorithms with proper incentives for collaboration. This is exactly what's needed in order to design those markets. So within this unified approach of computer science and economics, and by the way, it also spans other fields like operations research, but yeah, let me focus on those. So the goal is to create a theoretical foundation for the design and analysis of all those complex markets. So some of the markets we are dealing with are, or the topics we are dealing with are auction design and market equilibrium and pricing mechanisms, and also other areas like behavioral economics, which are better be also taken into account. So here is a very useful formalism when we talk about those big markets. It's called combinatorial markets. And the setting is that we have a single seller with a set, let's call it M, capital M, of small m heterogeneous objects for sale. And we have, so those are here like the items here. And we also have the buyers, those are n heterogeneous buyers. And what's special about it is that each one of those buyers has her own valuation function. And this valuation function is a mapping from every subset of items to a real number. So crucially, those valuation functions that represent the preferences of the buyers are not necessarily linear or additive. They can be very complex. So for example, some items can be substitutes to each other, and other items may complement each other. So maybe my value for two items will be much higher than the sum of my value for each one of them separately, and vice versa. So in this model, VI of S is the value that buyer I assigns to a set of items S. And usually this VI, this like VI that represents agent I's preferences, is private information. No one knows agent I's preferences except for agent I herself. And sometimes we assume that it is drawn from a known distribution Fi, which may be useful for the seller. And in our area of big data, it's very common for sellers to have access to some, to the distribution. Okay, so for example, maybe like the value of this agent one here for each one of the items is $3, but maybe her value for the set of all items is not 9, but maybe it's smaller, it's 7, etc. What's an allocation in this market? An allocation determines which items go to which player, to which buyer, and we denote by Xi the set of items that is allocated to buyer I. And our goal for this talk is to assign the goods in order to maximize the social welfare. What's the social welfare? The social welfare is the sum of the valuations of all agents in the market for their allocated items. Okay, so for example, the social welfare in this allocation, so this allocation gives the bag to agent 1 and the shoes and hat to agent 2. So what's the social welfare? It's the sum of the value of this agent for the bag plus the value of this agent for the shoes and hat, for this bundle. Okay, great. Okay, now this setting raises lots and lots of questions coming from the economic side, the game theoretic side, the computer science side. For example, can we find an optimal in the sense of welfare maximizing allocation in polynomial time? This is a very interesting computational problem. If we want to maximize social welfare, can we do it even without considering the economic constraints or the game theoretic constraints? Another question, are there prices that clear the market? Can we do it with a very simple mechanism that just sets prices on the items? And if so, can we find those prices in polynomial time? And maybe we don't only care about efficiency in our market, maybe we care also about fairness. This is a very, very important consideration to take. We want our allocations to be fair. What is a fair allocation? How do we define it? Can we find a fair allocation? Can we find it in polynomial time? So you see how all these different considerations are unified in some sense into one framework. How can we deal with the fact that values are private? So I told you before that the preferences of the agents, or what I call their valuations, are private. Can we incentivize them to tell us their true valuations? Can we design mechanisms that do so? And what is the performance of algorithms relative to mechanisms? So when I say algorithms, I mean input is given. I know the input and I just want an efficient algorithm computationally that will give me good welfare. And when I say mechanisms, I mean that in addition to the design of my algorithm, I also need to take care of creating the right incentives for agents to behave according to the way I want them. For example, to reveal their valuations. Otherwise, if I don't know their valuations and I'm optimizing over false values, I didn't achieve anything. How helpful is prior knowledge about the underlying distribution? Is it really helpful for sellers in our markets to collect information about buyers, to collect statistics about buyers? So intuition says, yes, it's helpful. And we want to formalize all these questions and many more. This is just, you know, a list, a partial list of the many questions we are dealing with. Okay, great. So very generally speaking, we have some good news. For example, if all valuations satisfy some property that we call substitutes, or sometimes in the literature it's called gross substitutes. And what it means, like the way I want you to think about it, is the items are substitutes to each other. For example, if I want to sell you let's say one cell phone or another cell phone, then they're substitutes to each other because you only need one cell phone. Okay, so in those cases, there always exists a market equilibrium with item prices. This is considered a very good result. Item prices are very simple. It's a very simple way to clear the market, and we have a market equilibrium. It's possible to efficiently compute those prices using a natural process, which is called ascending auctions, where prices begin low and they gradually increase until the market clears and everybody gets exactly what they want. And moreover, in equilibrium, we get full economic efficiency. This is called the first welfare theorem. It says that if we have a market equilibrium, then magically it also maximizes the social welfare. This is the best solution we can hope for. And this is under substitutes. However, without substitutes, everything starts to be very complex. There are no equilibrium prices. In order to get anything, we need an exponential number of prices. So we need to price every bundle maybe separately, which is very, very complex. And it's not something that someone would do in a real market. Also, it's computationally infeasible to get efficiency, even if we don't care about incentives, about strategic issues, about economic issues. Just to find the efficient solution is computationally hard. In fact, even if we don't want complete efficiency, we only want just slight efficiency, like a small fraction of the efficiency. Even this problem is difficult, and it requires exponential communication and computation. So things are very, very difficult in the general setting. And we also have some mixed news that says that if valuation satisfies some property that we call complement-free, then there are some good, some like half good, half bad news. So this diagram is a hierarchy that Lehman, and Nissan came up with. It's a hierarchy of classes of preferences. And what you see here in the green circle is what I showed you before, like the gross substitutes valuations. I don't want to get into the mathematical formulation of this. This is pretty complex to describe. Just think about items that substitutes each other. This is the region where we had all the good news. And this red circle is the general setting where you have like all possible valuations that they can be very complex. In between, you have all this hierarchy where one set is contained in the other. So we have submodular valuations, we have XOS valuations, we have subadditive valuations, never mind the specific definitions, but this class of subadditive valuations is also called complement-free evaluation, is this class that we say that roughly speaking, there are no complements within this class. So this is a hierarchy of, and this is the whole hierarchy of complement-free evaluations. And I want you to remember this class of preferences for later. This subadditive class turns out to be very important. Okay, so in order to reason about these markets, we have this tool, these magic tools of computer scientists that is called approximation, right? So we all know that in computer science, we know that there are hard problems that we cannot solve optimally. And the tool that we usually use to reason about such scenarios is approximation. So usually in economics, they want exact solutions. They want to find optimal solutions right to the point, right to the optimal solution. And usually there is some kind of a dichotomy whether the solution is optimal or not optimal. For example, in game theory, we have the notion of an equilibrium, Nash equilibrium. Maybe you've heard of this beautiful notion of Nash equilibrium, which is this stable situation where no agent wants to deviate from it. So you may ask whether a Nash equilibrium, a situation that is a Nash equilibrium, is optimal or not optimal. Okay, so economists would usually tell you, well, in most cases, a Nash equilibrium is not necessarily optimal, that's it. But in computer science, we are not satisfied with just saying whether it is optimal or not. We also have this notion of approximation that tells us, well, maybe it's not optimal, but maybe it gives me 90% of optimal always. So it's a very rigorous tool that lets us quantify some states, some solutions beyond the dichotomy of saying whether it's optimal or not. So formally, we say that a mechanism achieves alpha approximation to social welfare if at least alpha fraction of the social welfare is obtained in every instance. Okay, so here is something that I want to say early and clearly. So this is one interpretation of approximation. So this cartoon tells us about, you know, this scientist, and she says, you know, that thing that was 2.372864.2, and she says, now we got it down to 2.372863.9, that everyone applauds and you know, great joy. So this is not the type of results we are looking for. I mean, this is, yeah, let me say it otherwise. This is a great thing. Sometimes it's really nice to make these improvements. Sometimes the mathematical problems are so interesting that it's worth to do these improvements, or maybe the solutions are so elegant mathematically that it's really nice to understand more clearly those numbers. But what I want to convey here is that really the way I think about approximation is that in spite the fact that it's a very quantitative measure, it gives us qualitative insights. So for example, we can use the approximation paradigm to identify features that are essential to good mechanisms. We can quantify the cost of imposing side constraints on the space of mechanisms. For example, if we find that a simple mechanism, which is not optimal, but it's simple, which is another good property of a mechanism, if we find that a simple mechanism performs close to the optimal complex one, and close by this approximation notion, then we may conclude that it's good enough to use this simple mechanism. And also, I want you to recall that the full optimality benchmark is only a utopia. We don't expect to achieve it anyway. So it's not that we lose something that we could have otherwise achieved. And this approximation notion is the worst case notion. So in most markets, we should not expect the approximation ratio that we get in our theorems. We should expect much better solutions. Okay, and in the time remaining, I want to give you one example. So I have two examples in the slides. I don't think we'll have time to go over both examples. So let's start with example one, and if there is time and interest in the end, I can also mention the other example. Auctions. Auctions is a great, very interesting topic, and we know that there were already several Nobel Prizes for auctions. Just this year, the Nobel laureates Milgram and Wilson won the Nobel for their contribution to the study of auction. And now consider this combinatorial auction setting. So we are back to our setting of combinatorial markets. So let me remind you, we have many items, we have many buyers, and the buyers, each buyer has her preference that is depicted by this valuation function, VI, that sets some value to each subset of the items, to each bundle. What's a mechanism? A mechanism is like a general notion that generalizes auction. As an input, we get the buyer's reported valuations. And as an output, we give some allocation and payment. So payment is some tool that we use in order to incentivize agents to tell us their true valuations. And in a mechanism, the utility of a buyer is her value for what she gets minus the payment that she needs to make. We have a very nice class of mechanisms called VCG. This is after the researchers Vickrey, Clark, and Groves. Vickrey also won the Nobel Prize for this mechanism. Actually, the simplest way to think about it is for the sale of a single item. This is just a second price auction, which I may have time to talk about later. But this class of VCG mechanism, it gives the welfare optimal allocation. So it maximizes social welfare. And every bidder pays her externality. So every bidder pays what she, like the externality she imposes on the market, on the other buyers. And what we know is that in very, very general sense, in very general settings, VCG mechanisms are truthful. They always give the right incentives for agents to tell the truth. The problem is that VCG is very complex. In order to run VCG, I told you that the output is the optimal allocation, and computing the optimal allocation is very often a complex computational problem. So it's very complex, and many times practitioners, when they design mechanisms, they design not the optimal mechanism, but just a simple mechanism, a simple auction. So the question is, are there simple auctions that perform nearly as well? So maybe we don't go for the optimal allocation. Maybe it's fine to use a simpler auction that gives me some guarantee, maybe 50% of the optimal welfare, maybe 20% of the optimal welfare, maybe 90%. Okay, so let me introduce you the setting of simultaneous item auction. This is a simple auction, and this is actually, when we think about it, it's used in many platforms. For example, eBay, which is an auction website, it sells every item separately, so this is exactly what it's doing. So here is the setting. So remember, we have a market with many items and many buyers, And our buyers have some general valuation over subsets of items. But in a simultaneous item auction, we don't let them express their full valuation function. What we do is we sell every item separately. So we set a separate auction for the bag and a separate auction for the shoes. And each buyer submits bids, separate bids for each item. Okay, so BIJ is the bid that agent I submits on item J. So for example, in this example, the bag receives 2 bids, 2 from Alice, 4 from Bob, and the shoes receives 2 bids, 5 from Alice and 1 from Bob. And then for each one of these items, we just run a separate auction, and let's say we sell it to the highest bidder. And maybe we do a first price auction where the agent just pays what she bids, or maybe we do a second price auction where every winner pays the second highest bid. Okay, so for example, here I described a first price auction where Alice, she wins the shoes because she bids 5 on the shoes and Bob bids 1 on the shoes. So the shoes go to Alice, and in a first price auction, she just pays her bid, which is 5. In a second price auction, she would pay 1, okay, the second highest bid. And the problem in these auctions is that it's not really clear how to bid. There are many, many strategic issues. Unlike VCG, where we know as a fact, as a theorem, that it gives the right incentives for agents to tell us their true valuations, this auction, it doesn't even have the language for bidders to express their true values, because they may have different values on different sets. And even if they do have the language, it's not clear how to bid across different auctions. So what we are going for is the Nash equilibrium solution concept, which is a profile of bids where no agent can improve her utility. Okay, so again, what's a Nash equilibrium? It's a profile of bids. Every agent have a bid for each item, where fixing the other agent's bids, she tries to think, can I bid? So now fixing the other agent's bids and her bids, there is some allocation and some payment which gives her some utility. And now she thinks, can I improve? Can I say other bids that will give me higher utility? If the answer for every agent is no, then we are in a stable outcome, in a Nash equilibrium. Here is an example. Let's say we have buyer 1 and we have buyer 2. They're both unit demand. What is unit demand? It means that they have some value for each item. For example, Alice has value 2 for the bag and item 1 for the shoes. And her value for the bundle of A and B is just the maximum value for any item in this bundle. Okay, this is called unit demand. She goes home with a single item. So her value for a set of items is just the maximum value for any item in the bundle. Okay, so Alice here has value 2 for item A and 1 for item B. Therefore, she has value 2 for the bundle. And Bob here has value 1 for item A and value 2 for item B. Therefore, he also has value 2 for the bundle. Now, suppose that for item A, Alice, although her true value is 2, she bids 0 and Bob bids 1. And for item B, Alice bids 1 and Bob bids 0. This is an equilibrium, okay? And this is a bad equilibrium. Why? Because the social welfare is not optimal, right? The social welfare, so here the item A goes to Bob for value of 1, and item B goes to Alice for a value of 1. So the social welfare in this allocation is 2. What's the optimal allocation here? The optimal allocation here is to do the other diagonal, to give A to Alice and B to Bob for a social welfare of 4. So here we get only a half of the social welfare in an equilibrium. So we see that already in this very simple scenario of two agents with very simple valuation function, unit demand. By the way, unit demand is even a smaller class than gross substitutes. It's a subset of gross substitutes. So this is a very, very special case of a valuation function. And we only have 2 agents and 2 items. And even within this very simple scenario, we already lose half of the social welfare in equilibrium. Okay, so we can think about it as bad result, as bad news, because we lose half of the social welfare, but we can also think about it as good result in the sense that, well, we only lose a half. It's not too bad. Maybe if, for example, I can generalize this result to many agents and many items and complex valuation functions, if I can still say that no matter how complex the valuation functions are, and no matter how many items, maybe I have million items in my market and million agents in my market, and still in every Nash equilibrium, I get a guarantee that I get at least 1/2 of the optimal social welfare, then maybe it's a good result. And this is exactly the question that we ask. Do simultaneous item auctions give any welfare guarantee? And when I say welfare guarantee, I mean in equilibrium. Now let me spend 1 minute to motivate this question. So far it was a pretty abstract setting, but spectrum auctions is a real thing. And spectrum auction is the way that wireless bandwidth is sold to wireless companies in many countries, in the US, in Europe, in many countries. Those are huge auctions that are based on what's called simultaneous ascending auctions. So the area is divided into many areas, and we run a separate auction for each area, some type of ascending auction. And the nice thing is that this simultaneous item auction is a good proxy for this simultaneous ascending auction. So we can use this proxy to reason about how to design, how to run these spectrum auctions. Of course, just I explained to you before, strategic considerations lead to economic inefficiency. And if you talk to an economist about it, the common belief would be that without strong complements, if the areas are not strongly complement to each other, then those simultaneous auctions work pretty well. Well, what does it mean, pretty well? It's not really clear, because if we don't have a language to talk about pretty well, then it's a very rough and vague statement. And what I want to claim in this talk is that this is inevitably a statement about approximation. This is exactly where our tool of approximation can be very handy, can be very useful. Okay, so let's try to formalize this statement that without strong complements, those simultaneous auctions work pretty well. So what does it mean without strong complements? Well, we have this nice hierarchy. So maybe what we mean by without strong complements is as long as our valuation functions in our complex markets are complement-free, or what we call subadditive valuations. Well, what's SAA? We have this proxy that we call simultaneous item auctions. And what do we mean by pretty well? Now we have a very rigorous notion of approximation. We know what it means to be alpha approximation. And with these tools and language, we now have a theorem that formalizes this vague statement that without strong complements, SAAs works pretty well. And what we show in this theorem is that if bidder valuations are drawn from distributions over subadditive functions, right? We are here within these boundaries. The expected welfare of every base Nash equilibrium of the first price simultaneous item auction, this is the proxy, has at least 50%, this is the approximation notion, of the expected optimal welfare. Okay, let me say it again. This is a pretty amazing result in the following sense. Remember the previous very simple market that I showed you with 2 agents and 2 items, and the valuation function was inside a tiny dot inside this region. We already saw that we may lose 50% of the optimal welfare in a Nash equilibrium. What this theorem says is that even if we have million items and million users, and we are within this very complex valuation function, and even if we are in an incomplete information setting, this is what Bayes Nash equilibrium means, in this equilibrium, we always get at least 50% of the expected optimal welfare. Okay, and moreover, in a paper by Ralph Garden, it was shown that this is tight, meaning that we have no way, no other auction format, you know, any auction format that can guarantee more than 50% of the optimal welfare. So in a sense, these simultaneous item auctions, if what we care about is the worst case guarantee, this is the best way to sell items. Okay, so this tells us something about the real world, because this is more or less, roughly speaking, how those spectrum auctions are run. Okay, so now my question for the organizers, should I stop here or go on to the second example?
Professor, you can continue. You have a little bit of more time.
Okay, so let me take some more time to show you the second example. So again, we're talking about a combinatorial market, same setting as before. So let me remind you, we have n buyers, we have a set M of m buyers. Each buyer has a valuation function that maps bundles of items to real value. And we have what's called quasi-linear utility, where the utility of an agent is just the value minus the price. Okay, so we have this, I told you about this nice thing called market equilibrium. Let me tell you what it is. What is a market equilibrium? Also called Walrasian equilibrium, after walrus. So a Walrasian equilibrium is a tuple of an allocation, S1 to Sn. Si is the set that goes to agent I, and item prices. So we price every item such that this is like a magic situation. Every buyer I maximizes her utility, meaning that what she gets, her utility for the set Si that she gets, this is her value for the set minus the price that she pays. What's the price she pays? This is just the sum of item prices within this set. It's greater than any other bundle. If she comes to the store, to the supermarket, and she sees these item prices, Si, what she gets in this equilibrium, is exactly the bundle that maximizes her utility, and this is true for every agent. And moreover, all the items are sold. The market completely clears. Okay? This is, so I just want to emphasize how great this situation is. What I want you to think about is, you know, 1,000 people gets into the supermarket. There are many items there. Every item has a price. And every agent says, under these prices, I want this bundle. This bundle maximizes my utility. So Alice comes to the store and she wants this bundle. Bob comes to the store, he wants that bundle. And all the hundreds and thousands of buyers who come to the store want some bundles. And magically, we can price items and allocate items so that every agent, despite all the conflicts, every agent gets exactly what she wants and all the items are sold. So this Walrasian equilibrium is really great, and as I told you before, if it exists, it maximizes social welfare. Okay, let me skip the example for the sake of time. What I want to tell you is that even in very simple scenarios, a Walrasian equilibrium may not exist. For example, and I'm not going to go through this example in details, but what I want you to see here is that even in this very simple scenario where I have just two agents with very simple valuations and two items, a Walrasian equilibrium does not exist. There is no way to assign prices to these items in such a way that all the agents are happy. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. These are not two unit demand buyers. Sorry. If it was two unit demand buyers, then there always exists a Walrasian equilibrium. Buyer one here is unit demand, and buyer two here is beyond subadditive. So what we see here is that her value for each item is 1, but her value for the bundle of both items is more than 2. And in this situation, we don't have a Walrasian equilibrium. And we have very beautiful papers showing that in some sense, gross substitutes is the boundary, is the frontier for the existence of Walrasian equilibrium. So for all of these beautiful valuation functions, we are not guaranteed to have a Walrasian equilibrium. So now we want to apply the theory from behavioral economics. This is another Nobel Prize, actually, that we want to apply here. And specifically, the one we want to apply is what's called the endowment effect. What's the endowment effect? The endowment effect says that people tend to inflate the value of what they own. If you have something, you value it more than your value would be for the same item if you didn't own it. Okay, so this is the endowment effect. And this endowment effect was verified in very nice experiments. For example, let me give you one example. So a class of students was divided into was partitioned into two classes, two parts randomly. And one group received mugs and the other group received chocolate bars. And then after each group received whatever she received, a questionnaire was asked and people were asked, do you want to switch? Do you prefer the mug or the chocolate bar? And 89% of the people who received the mug reported that they prefer the mug. And 90% of the people who got the chocolate bar reported that they prefer the chocolate bar. So you see how people love what they own. And yeah, there are other experiments. And the question we asked was whether we can use the endowment effect to harness and improve market stability. Intuitively, it should help, because if people love what they get, maybe solutions that we think about them as not stable, maybe they're more stable than what we think they are. So let me skip this formal model. And right, so let me just tell you what we came up with. So we have this notion of endowment equilibrium, which is a Walrasian equilibrium with respect to endowed valuations. So what are endowed valuations? Endowed valuations is my valuation for whatever I get, given the fact, accounting for the endowment effect. So I won't tell you exactly the formulation that we use for how to account for the endowment effect, but somehow we account for the endowment effect. And now an endowment equilibrium is just a Walrasian equilibrium like before. Everyone gets whatever she prefers and all items are sold, but it is with respect to the endowed valuations. And what we show is that with this endowment effect, so remember, before we had the result that a Walrasian equilibrium exists only for this small class of gross substitutes. And now we show that with the endowment effect, endowment equilibrium exists all the way to this class, which is a subclass of subadditive that is called XOS. But all the way to here, we know that we have an endowment equilibrium. So in a way, we use theory from behavioral economics, the endowment effect, to reason about stability of markets. And we also have some computational results on how to compute these equilibria. Okay, and I think I'll skip the bundling part for the sake of time. And I'll go directly to the conclusions. So what I told you in this talk is that computerized economic scenarios may be complex. So I showed you the formalism of combinatorial markets, which is a very complex scenario. And what we try to do in the area of computation and economics is to analyze theoretically this complexity, both from computer science perspective and from economic and game theory perspective. And we show that the approximation paradigm provides structural insights that cannot be achieved by optimality theory alone, and it gives us qualitative insights regarding features and formats that are useful in practice. So for example, we see that sometimes simple mechanisms are sufficiently good, like in the case of simultaneous item auctions, and sometimes complex mechanisms are required. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We have a couple of questions, so I'm just going to go right ahead and ask them in the series they came in. The first one is something that didn't get covered in the presentation, actually. It's about Say's law. So the question is, how relevant is Say's law on demand and supply? How is it useful in market design that's adopted by countries in today's time? Yes. So the question is, how relevant is Say's law on demand and supply, and how useful is it in market design adopted by countries in today's time?
So I'm not expert in these. Maybe I prefer to go to the next question. I don't want to say something that I'm not an expert in.
No problem. Okay, so the next question is, what's the difference between Nash equilibrium and Walrosian equilibrium?
Okay. So, good. So Nash equilibrium is a general concept in games. And so what is a Nash equilibrium? Suppose you have a game and every player in a game. So what is a game? A game is some abstraction of some situation in the world. And every player, these are the agents, the people in this scenario, has some different actions, different strategies she can play. What is the Nash equilibrium? A Nash equilibrium is a state. State means that every agent chose one strategy among the many strategies she has. And within this profile of strategies that were chosen by the agents, once we fix, so now when one agent reasons about the strategy that she chose, she fixes all the other strategies played by the other players, and she asks herself, do I have a better strategy? Can I improve my utility in a way, can I improve my utility by deviating to another strategy? And in a Nash equilibrium, no agent can improve her utility by a unilateral deviation. Okay, this is a very general concept in games, in any game that you can think of. Okay, so this is a Nash equilibrium. Walrasian equilibrium is a concept of markets, of combinatorial markets, like the one I showed you in the model. And this is a very specific type of equilibrium. So again, also here, no agent can improve her utility by getting a different bundle, but this is in a more indirect way. And the indirect way is through prices. So the way to think about it is that the designer sets item prices, and then, so Walrasian equilibrium is a tuple of item prices and allocation such that no agent can improve her utility given the prices by deviating to another bundle. So the way to think about it, if we want to think about it within the same language that we spoke about games, suppose that I assign prices to the item. So every item is assigned some price. And now I, as an agent, gets to the store and I see these prices. So the Endowment Equilibrium also already gave me some bundle, this SI, which we called. And it is a Endowment Equilibrium if when I get to the store and I see these prices, this bundle that I get in the equilibrium is exactly the bundle that I would choose to maximize my utility. Okay, so this is the connection between the two notions.
All right, thank you. That was a helpful answer. A couple of other questions through Facebook that we've gotten. One or two requests to repeat some concepts, Professor. One is to repeat, please, if you could explain polynomial time again. And if you could go over the experiment of the mug and the chocolate bar, except
Sure.
that the question asker has also asked if the approach to this mug and chocolate bar experiment can be different, which is, can it be presented to students of each group with an item like a mug or a bar after the question, with which they would, and ask them what would they prefer?
Yes, okay, great questions. So let me share my screen again and go back to the experiment. And actually I can also show you another experiment, which I skipped in the talk. Okay. Okay, so this is the experiment. So again, class was partitioned into two groups. Each group, one group received mug and one group received chocolate. Now, because the students in the class were partitioned randomly, there is no reason to think that the people in the group that received the mug would prefer a mug, or that the people in the group that received the chocolate prefer the chocolate. There is no reason to believe that this is the case. And actually, I think I should double check myself, but regarding the question of when the question was asked, I believe that a questionnaire was circulated before. Okay, yeah, I don't remember the details, but anyway, you would expect that if the questionnaire was circulated before, you would get 50-50, like within one group, within the group that received the mug, roughly 50% of them would prefer the mug and 50% would prefer the chocolate. I didn't mention that the mug and the chocolate, they are of equal cost. If you go to buy them, they're both comparable cost, okay? So there is no reason to believe that that would be the case. And nevertheless, after the mug and the chocolate were given to people in the different groups, there was very strong preference within each group to the object they received. Okay, so this is the nice thing. Let me show you another experiment. This experiment was related but different. Here again, a class of students was divided into two groups. One group received a mug as a present, just received a mug. And then the other group, the people in the other group didn't receive anything. And then people, the owners, the people that received a mug were asked, how much would you be willing to sell your mug for? You know, someone from the other group wants a mug, how much are you willing to sell it for? And the median response was $5.25. Okay, so this is how much are you willing to sell it for is a proxy for how much do you value it. How much do you value? So the median value of agents who received the mug was 5.25. And the students in the other group that didn't receive a mug were asked, how much would you be willing to buy it for? And their median answer was 2.25. So we see that it's less than a half. So again, this experiment also shows that once you have the mug, your value is much higher for it.
That is very helpful. Thank you, Professor. And just if we could revisit the concept of polynomial time once for one of our participants.
Okay, so a polynomial is a function that, roughly speaking, the way to think about it is a function that doesn't grow very rapidly. Okay, so we are now all in COVID time. So the fear of everyone is that COVID grows, that COVID cases would grow exponentially. Exponentially means that it's not polynomial, it's faster, it grows faster than polynomial. So what's polynomial? A function is polynomial. So what is exponential, for example? So here is an example of a function that is exponential. F of x is 2 to the x, okay? Where the x, my variable, is in the exponent. Polynomial function is where my variable x is not in the exponent. So for example, x cubed or x to the 4 or x to the any number is polynomial. And asymptotically, that's what we care about in computation. As x grows, the question is how fast does my function grow? So polynomial functions, they would grow relatively mildly, reasonably, whereas exponential growth is what we fear from, which is grow very, very fast. Like very early on, it grows like this, and this is and usually we prefer algorithms that don't grow very fast with my input. Because, for example, if I talk about huge markets, my input is like, for example, the number of items in the market. It can be millions. Or the number of agents in my markets. It can also be in the millions. So I want something that would grow reasonably slow or not too fast with my input.
Okay, great. There is a follow-up though to the previous revisiting of the mug and chocolate bar example. The follow-up is that, Professor, you said the price at which the mug would be sold for is a proxy for the value that would be put on that object. So the follow-up that's come up isn't valuation the price you would want to buy an item for versus it being the price you would want to sell it for?
No, so both are proxy. So the way we think about value, so value, it's a very good question, because what is value? The way we think about value is your willingness to pay for it or your willingness to sell it for. So for example, if I say that my value for an object is $10, what it means is that if someone offers to me this item in slightly more than $10, I don't want it. And if someone offers it to me for even just slightly less than $10, then I want it. Then it means that my value for it is $10. And it goes in both directions, selling or buying.
All right, Professor. I think that's helpful to whoever has been asking the back-to-back questions on that experiment. I think the last question that we have is about equilibrium prices and how are they impacted before and after tariff changes?
Sorry, how?
Are equilibrium prices impacted before and after tariff changes?
You mean in the context of endowment equilibrium?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. So the prices themselves, the prices themselves don't change. They are not impacted. It's only the valuation that changes. So in Wood-Rasen equilibrium, remember, we have allocation. So every agent receives some bundle, and there are item prices, and her utility is her value for the bundle minus the sum of the prices of the items within her bundle. And in an endowment equilibrium, the prices don't change, but my value for some bundle that may include some items that I did get and some items that I did not get is some function that depends also on the bundle that I got. So the way to think about it is I value more the items that I already got, I value them more, but the prices don't change, the prices remain the same.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Professor. I think we can take away from this that we need to have our definitions and our concepts of valuation versus price very clear before we enter into understanding these effects. that was really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who asked questions. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time and a wonderful talk. We will see all of our participants for the next masterclass. Have a good day, Professor, and all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye. Have a good day.